I must say, I think the last 10 years of my 45 in the public service, what I saw happening inside the Canadian Forces, and then to the country in general, really disappointed me. It disappointed me, and it made me angry, frankly. It made me realize that some of the things that were going on, I did not agree with, and I was just very disappointed in where our country was headed.
Welcome back to the Northern Sentinels podcast. On this episode, I sit down with Michel Maisonneuve, a retired Canadian 3-star general and public servant who worked for 45 years in service to the country. Michel was born in Montreal and spent the first part of his youth north of the city. As a result of his father's profession, the family moved out west, where he began grade 9 in Saskatchewan as a unilingual francophone. After graduating high school in Thunder Bay, he spent 35 years in the Army, rising to the rank of lieutenant general. He made the choice to continue to serve in helping reopen College Militarire Royal in Saint-Jean, Quebec, as the academic director. After a decade in that position, he decided to retire to the peace and quiet of the Niagara region of Ontario. However, most Canadians might be familiar with the general from his acceptance speech at the Vimy Gala in November 2022, where his remarks drew a significant amount of criticism. Why, after 45 years of service to the nation, would someone step into the spotlight during their retirement? We discuss this and much more. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Michel Maisonneuve. Michel, thank you so much for being on the podcast and for inviting me to your home. What a great part of Ontario and down here in Niagara. It's awesome.
Yeah, we love it. It's a great place to retire and close to everything. So, and the wine is not bad.
That's never a bad thing. One of the things when we were chatting previously that I thought was just really cool is in terms of your family history that you're 11th generation Canadian, if I have that right. And like how has that informed your thinking, or how has that focused you on what you're going to do with your life, having that sort of lineage in the country?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to do a podcast, and congratulations on this initiative. I think it's a great idea, and I'll be listening to all of them for sure. Yeah, 11th generation. I'll tell you the thing I guess that it jumps out at me is how blessed I am, how lucky I am to have grown up in this country, and that's the first thing. The second thing is how important to have all the different immigrants that come to our country now, and how they've helped build the country. And I don't say that without it's not just I'm not just saying that. I think I have lots of friends who are from different ethnic backgrounds. Barbara, my wife, is a first generation Canadian. Her parents came here. Her dad came to work on the railroad or in the bush. He's Ukrainian. Her mom came from post-war Germany, and both of them had jobs. Both of them helped build the country, help our economy and everything. And my parents, my parents both on my mother's side and my father's side, worked hard all their life and everything. So when you look at my lineage compared to that of my wife and a lot of my friends, it's the comparison is, you work hard. You can achieve something, you can help your country, you can move forward. And and sometimes I find that the Canadians who've been here for a long time, don't realize how lucky we are to be in this country. You kind of take it for granted. Whereas when my in-laws came here, they said, we are the luckiest people in the world to have arrived in Canada, and to come here from our countries, which had been pretty well destroyed in the Second World War, So very fortunate, and really appreciate our immigrants and especially those that come here and have a desire to build our country.
Where did your family originate? Although 11th generation, obviously you'll have a bunch of different branches. So, yeah. What's the background of your family history then?
Interesting. My father is a Franco-Ontarian. He was born in Rockland, Ontario, so near Ottawa. I think you know the place. Most people do who live in Ottawa, and eventually his parents made their way to Montreal, and so the Montreal suburbs. My mother was born in south of Montreal, north of Montreal in Sainte Thérèse, and so and they met at a community event or whatever there. And my mother was the oldest of 12 kids, oldest girl of 12 children, and so my dad was a machinist first, and then eventually became a bricklayer. My mother was always a stay-at-home mother, and in fact, when I guess she was in grade 5, her mom said, "Okay, that's enough schooling for you. You're not going to stay home and help me with the other, 11 children." So like, for example, between my mother and the youngest brother, there's almost 20 years, difference. So she was already an adult looking after when the kid was born, she was already 15, 16 kind of thing. And, so that's kind of where they came from. And I was born in Saint-Jérôme, so north of Montreal, and lived there until I was 14.
You were there till you were 14. What was life like in Montreal as a kid at that point?
Well, it was kind of, okay, so this is 1967. I was 14 years old, and the reason why I remember that is because, of course, the Beatles were out, the Rolling Stones were out. I remember going to the bus station in Saint-Jérôme as a kid, and putting money in. They had a jukebox there, and I put money in the jukebox to listen to "I Can't Get No Satisfaction." But this is a true story. So here's a French kid, francophone, didn't speak English. So I'm going to the bus station to listen to Satisfaction. I just thought about this now.
It's neat how your memories are tied to things like that.
Things like music and smells and food. I hated lobster. My parents had lobster. I guess lobster must have been, because my parents were not very rich, but lobster must have been pretty cheap in those days. And salmon, they loved to eat salmon. My mom was a great, stay-at-home mom. Of course, there were 6 kids in the family. So, and my dad was so I said he was a machinist first, and then became a bricklayer. And then he was a contractor, and in those days there was no question of bricklaying in the middle of the winter. I mean, and the winters, of course, in north of Montreal were just horrible. So there were many times when he was not working as a bricklayer. So then he worked he was a maître d', and he was a bartender, and so worked in the hotel industry, and it was a pretty cool. But he was never out of work, and worked his butt off, and. I think one of the things he passed on to all of us was to work hard, and so it was very interesting too.
So you said you were in Montreal until you were 14. So what happened at 14?
Yeah, so my dad then, because of this, kind of inability to keep working as a construction worker all year round, got himself a job. Applied and got a job with a company that builds pulp mills. And I guess in some of the big pulp tanks, they need to line the inside of the tanks with these special bricks that are chemical resistant. And so he was doing that. And then he began traveling. And this is before 1967. He's all over Canada. And then eventually the company said, we're going to build a pulp mill in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. And we'd like you to move there and kind of be the foreman for this new build. And so this is during Expo 67. So I had a chance to go to Expo 67 a couple of times. Man in His World in those days, it was called Expo 67. It was pretty cool. But the whole family picked up. We were renting a house, and so my mother bought these great big trunks. The blue trunks, the blue aluminum trunks that and she packed, I think, 10 or 15 of them, and we jumped on the train. The company moved us to Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, and we rented a house there. And so I finished grade 8 in French, and got to Saskatchewan a month before school started in the middle of the summer, and started grade 9 in English. And so that was a pretty intense moment. I mean, in fact, I was a pretty good student in Quebec, but my marks went way down, of course, and especially those where I had to speak, because, of course, I had this heavy accent, and kids made fun of me, and in fact, I remember having to, I was so nervous and everything that, they brought a doctor, to see me and said, okay, and so they gave me pills. I was taking Valium or something, to relax me. But after a few months, everything kind of improved. And I think after a year, I lost a lot of my accent and was very lucky because I was in the middle of the kids who were older than me, my older siblings, kept their French accent, and my younger siblings kind of lost their French. So I was very, very lucky. At 14, it was a perfect time for me to learn English, and it obviously served me well all the rest of my life and my career in the military.
Is there any sort of pushback from your siblings about going? Because it's got to be a massive culture shock going from being a francophone family in Montreal to being in Saskatchewan.
You know what? It was, instead of pushback, it was excitement. It was unbelievable excitement, and again, when you think of culturally what was happening, and this was the days of the make love not war, and the love movement, and San Francisco, and again the Beatles and the Stones and everything, and so my brother Claude, believe it or not, my brother Claude, the oldest in the family, he's now 81. He used to call me Mike, even when I was living in Quebec, because it was cool. Okay. So, isn't that interesting? Yeah. So we get to Saskatchewan, and of course people are calling me Mike there because Michel. Oh my God, that's a girl's name, and there's, I would say the cultures were not as integrated as they are today. And you have to think this is before Trudeau came to power, before he the Official Languages Act and all that stuff. So we moved to Saskatchewan. And believe it or not, there's a few communities, francophone communities in Saskatchewan. In fact, Gravelbourg is apparently, and I've never been there, but it's a town that's kind of like Welland here in Ontario, which is like half francophone, and so it was very exciting, and so we moved there with my two siblings younger than I was, and one of my older. So four of us plus my mom, and the five of us on the train for 3 days going across Canada in these roumettes, and they had two chairs during the day, and then they would bring down two beds on each side, and for at night, and it was a pretty classy way to go across Canada. And we got to Saskatoon, and then took the high-speed train the high-speed train in those days, the train to, you know what I mean, to Prince Albert. It was a very interesting trip.
So other than the learning English and a bit of that shock of having to rapidly learn a new language, what were your memories of time in Saskatchewan?
It was very relaxed compared to what I was used to in Quebec. Quebec, of course, in grade 8, I was in a Catholic school. Of course, all schools in Quebec are Catholic. Separate schools are Protestant, or so it's the reverse from Ontario. So I was all used to wearing. I wore a sport jacket to school at grade 8, and you had to be dressed nicely, and no jeans allowed, and so I get to Saskatchewan, and kids are all wearing jeans and runners and everything. So for the entire grade 9 though, I still wore my sport jacket. Okay. I was kind of the nerd, and I was wearing glasses, so I had the big horn rims, and I was truly 100% nerd. But the other thing is I really found the people open and very generous and very nice. I mean, I had made friends very quickly in the summer, and in fact, I made a girlfriend at 14 years old. I remember her name, Cindy Tarasiuk, if you're listening. Ukrainian girl, is neighbor and all that. But it was great, and I took the bus to go to school. So and I went to St. Mary's High School. It was a Catholic school. And made some friends, one of which I'm still in contact with, a guy called Manny McLaughlin, a good guy. So once I got over the real difficult parts of the learning the language and going to school, it was great. And my parents, my dad, worked very hard, and I understand now the pulp mill's closed. So time goes rolls on, and but he was very successful. He loved what he was doing. Eventually, I think both of my brothers, at least one of them, came and worked with him, and my sister worked with him there too. So the whole family was, and they made good friends that they stayed in contact with after that. And but after a year, the company said, "Okay, that was great. The thing is well on its way now. We'd like you to move to Thunder Bay." And so I ended up doing my last 4 years of high school in Thunder Bay, grade 10 to grade 13. So I had grade 13 in those days, and so another move, but again, my parents were, they were nomads. There was no problem picking up and just going, and of course I loved it because, got to see different parts of the country.
Did you start to get instilled with a bit of a sense of adventure? Because clearly, when you said that the family, nobody railed against going to Saskatchewan, actually was, viewed quite positively. Do you get a sense that was one of the reasons why you were drawn to something like the Army?
Could be. I've never thought about it. They looked at this as, I think it was one of those things where my dad always said, if you want to work, you can find work. You just need to go where the work is. And so he never had a problem with heading out there, and I guess that positive approach was passed on to us. As far as joining the military, that had really never. Although I must say that when I was before I left Quebec, I was in a Quebec Air Cadet Corps for just a few months, and I kind of liked it. My brother, the oldest brother that I was talking about, Claude, there had spent 3 years in the Vandus, and so he'd done an initial engagement, and he loved the uniform and everything, and I loved to see him come home, dressed in uniform, and watching him put on his puttees in those days, and it was really really cool. So even though I say I'd never really thought of joining the military, so there were some of those anecdotes or whatever that probably in the back of my mind. But in terms of being mobile, going where the work is, that's something that was passed on very early on.
Was there any? So Claude was in the Vandus. Was there any other family members who had spent time in service?
No, I had an uncle who was a Quebec policeman, but no. Otherwise, no, nobody. Maybe a cousin. But nobody that I really got to know or anything, or nobody was a role model for me, certainly before I joined. So as far as me joining, it was more of an issue of going to university. I always thought I'd like to go to university. My parents were not well-to-do, and I was always worried about whether they could pay for it or not. And in my high school, there happened to be a guidance counselor who had gone to RMC and failed, actually. Dr. Callahan, not doctor, but Mr. Callahan, and really nice guy. But he said, "Hey, well, why don't you think of RMC?" And I thought, "What? What is RMC?" And then he tried to explain it to me and all that stuff. And eventually, I thought that was a great idea, so I applied.
It's yours is not the first story where it's been an individual who's raised military college as an option, or back before the internet, there was a far more prolific, recruiting effort where recruiters would be out in schools all over the place. Did you ever think of, if you didn't have the opportunity to go to military college, join the military, where you think professions you would have pursued? Yeah,
I loved drawing. And so I thought, and my dad was taking a drafting course and by correspondence, and I used to take his lessons and actually do them, and I loved it, and I was pretty good with a pen to draw, and so I thought I'd like to be an architect, and in fact, so in those days in high school, you when you were in grade 13, you would fill out. In the beginning of grade 13, so even after in the fall of your last year, you would fill out an application given by the government of Ontario, and it was you put your top 3 choices that you'd like to apply, and I think I applied at Waterloo, Toronto, and RMC. And lo and behold, I think even I think it's either in December or January. RMC sent 2 people to come and talk to me. So they sent the head of the electrical engineering department and a major. So a guy in uniform and a civilian. And they come to the school, and my teacher, I think, or even might have been Mr. Callahan, said, "You got 2 people here who'd like to talk to you about RMC." It happened to be the day that we were doing Greaser Day at school, so I'm all greased up. I've got my hair, and I had long hair, so it's all slicked back, and I'm wearing a T-shirt with no sleeves, and playing the part of the greaser. And these guys come and talk to me, so I don't know what kind of an impression I made, but obviously. I received an offer very soon after that, but I thought, I hope they're coming to see other people, because it must be obviously very expensive to do that. But that's interesting what you say, and how they, this was pre-internet, it was pre a lot of things, and so everything was done by mail. In fact, I remember getting my invitation and a letter in the mail, and responding, telephoning or whatever, and I had to go to Winnipeg to the recruiting center to be processed.
So you hadn't gone to a recruiting center, so you just applied to military college through the normal university application process. Oh, isn't that interesting? Okay.
Yep. And then the recruiting center in Winnipeg are the ones that were writing me saying, okay, well, here's your offer, and if you agree, well, then, here's when you would arrive here. And then it was very well organized, because RMC then sent me a letter. The guy who just passed away, a couple of years ago now, a captain. I stayed in contact with him for a long time, even when I went to RMC, and then after that through my career. But he was a great guy. But he said, you're going to be part of the class of '76, the centennial of the college, and you guys are pretty. You guys are going to be pretty. It was a form letter, but it was still a letter to. And I was very impressed. And so the day that I was supposed to be enrolled, to get the swearing in and all that, we had to go to Winnipeg. My parents came with me on the train, and they were at the swearing in with this brigadier general whose name I forget now. But
what did your parents think about the idea? Because you don't have a history of military service.
They were super proud. They were so proud. It was never, why are you doing this or whatever. They were really proud. I was very lucky to go in the path that I did, and my parents were always very supportive. It was great,
When you reflect back on those 4 years at RMC, what stands out for you the most of that experience, and how how it informed the rest of your career?
Yeah, I think first of all, the friends I made. I think it was just an incredible moment. I made so many, all my buds that I've stayed in contact with, and there's no one in there, I think, that I can say that I didn't appreciate or like. Second thing would be the mentors that it started there. It started at RMC, where the mentors, made a difference for me. And, my recruit flight, CFL was fantastic. The first cadet squadron leader was a guy called Bill Sutherland, who eventually joined the PPCLI, and he was a guy I idolized. The guy, scared the crap out of me, but I loved him. He looked like he was a model, and so he was my first mentor. And then I went to my basic training after my first year at RMC, and in '73, and Sergeant Cy Clayton was my instructor. I have contact with him to this day. He's now 82 years old. A fantastic guy. He was one of the very few black people in the military. A black sergeant who served with the guards, the Black Watch, and eventually became an RCR, of course, when those regiments were disbanded. But he was a guy I emulated, and I to this day he's just one of my heroes, And I used to, a couple of great stories. When we'd, at Chilliwack, BC, and we'd do assault boat training, and so he'd be with us in the assault boat, and all of us nerdy officer cadets, we'd pull the assault boat right close to the shore and tried not to jump into the water, to get our boots wet. Right. He would make it a point of jumping, up to his, his calves in water, and the Queen of Battle, he'd say, He was a fantastic guy, and so it's very kind of cool. And eventually, And he treated us like young gentlemen, and that's the thing he used to say. You young gentlemen are going to be someday leaders, and you need to look the part and act the part. And so, he showed us how to tuck our shirts in, and to this day, I still tuck my shirt into the same way that he told us to do. And he was always very, very cool. He was a real professional, and gave you really made you understand the professionalism of our NCOs, and of course, you know what I'm talking about. And so he was my second, probably my biggest mentor, but the second one that I really looked at as a model. And then you have them throughout your career, of course, but anyway, great. He was a great guy. So I love that. And then coming back to RMC, I loved the structure that the college gave you. I was a pretty damn good student before in high school, and then when I got to RMC, I found it a little harder, obviously, because the university is different. You're kind of left on your own and so on. But my marks were decent, but not great, and I was originally in chemical engineering, but I got to a point where after 2 years at RMC, I was unable to. I was really having trouble academically, and it just seemed that the exact sciences were not going into my very hard brain. So I switched to arts, and that ended up being very good too, because I'd started to lose some of my French, after working in English all this time in Thunder Bay and then RMC. And so I went into honors French, which allowed me to really kind of get back to my to my roots of French, and doing lots of literature and lots of reading and lots of writing and discussion. So that was really, really good. And so I graduated the Bachelor of Arts in French.
What was your junior officer time? When you reflect back on that, I mean, what are the things that really stand out for you from that period in your career?
First of all, I wore glasses, so I would have liked to be a pilot. There's no question. But then I thought, okay, so what are the kind of fighter pilots of the Army? And that's kind of the Armored Corps, I thought, so tankers and cavalry and all that stuff. So
I say, yeah, not that I'm agreeing with you, but I'm just saying, yeah, is
you're acknowledging. Okay, sure. You're just acknowledging. Yeah, so I went in the Armored Corps, and I really enjoyed my training, my summer training while I was at RMC, and I was very lucky also coming back to RMC. The 76 was the centennial of the college, right? And I happened to be a cadet wing commander. I was, again, very fortunate of taking part in all the parades and the celebrations that we did for the centennial of the college, and so my class and I had a wonderful, wonderful time. Throughout. So then I did my final phase training in the summer of 76 with Rick Hillier, who ended up being Chief of Defense Staff, and then we stayed in Gagetown after our armored phase to do an armored reconnaissance phase. So I got to the regiment, I would say, in October of 76, and it was fantastic because, of course, the regiment it's 12e Régiment Blindé. It's a French-Canadian regiment in Valcartier. And again, the officers and the soldiers there were just fantastic. It's kind of joining a family, and esprit de corps was outstanding. We had an exchange with a French regiment from France, and so we had a permanently stationed a French officer in Canada and a Canadian in France at the regiment. And so, loved joining the family. We worked hard. We had but again, the armed forces in those days were not that, I mean, we talk about the forces, how they are today. They're having their challenges. Well, we had challenges even in those days. I mean, I joined a squadron that had no vehicles at one point, and they were just kind of on paper. This was the squadron. We had a squadron commander, a major. We had a 2IC, a captain. I'm a lieutenant with my buddy Don McNeil, who's also a lieutenant. A guy from Newfoundland who's in a French regiment. It's very cool.
Yeah.
But, like we were spending our days, going to the office and reading Jane's Defense Quarterly. And Don used to call it looking at the catalog, to see what we could buy.
I like that, yeah.
But and so the forces were not in that great shape, but eventually I ended up the squadron ended up being re-rolled, and we ended up with I ended up being troop leader for a troop of Lynx vehicles, which are tracked vehicles based on the M113, doing reconnaissance, sneak and peek, and loved that. Did that for about a year as troop leader, and then you're working with real soldiers, and you're learning how much initiative they have, and how they make they make your day. They make you look good, and they can also if you don't treat them properly, they let you know, and very interesting. And of course, I compared that later in my life with commanding Anglophone soldiers versus Francophone soldiers, and interesting kind of differences there. And I guess one of the things that I found is Francophone soldiers will be unhappy, and they will tell you face to face and very loudly, whereas sometimes Anglophone soldiers will kind of keep it behind and not really say anything until it gets to a point where they get so mad that it comes out. It's just a different. The French Canadians will argue back, and they'll be pissed off, and they'll tell you right up. Whereas the Anglophones, I've always found kind of very much quieter, and we'll kind of keep it inside, be unhappy, and then eventually we'll tell you. Just very interesting. But anyway, luckily I was very blessed to be able to have that time in command of a troop, and then luckily again. My name came up to go to France to be one of those exchange officers. So
it's all right.
Yeah. I ended up going for 2 years in the French regiment as a Canadian, the lone Canadian there. And again, what an opportunity! What a great time I had. We were based in Sedan in the Ardennes, about 4 hours from Lahr. Lahr was my support base, so in Lahr, Germany. So we had a brigade in Lahr, and we had a whole air division in Baden-Baden in those days. In Germany, so was going back and forth when I needed to do administration, and but otherwise, I mean, you're living in France. And I commanded conscripts there for 14 months, a troop of conscripts, and had some reasonable success, but loved it. Made some great friends again that I kept in contact with, and that eventually. Our Canadian forces are very small, so you make a lot of friends and relationships. And then you realize that you make relationships with militaries of other countries as well. And say one of the lieutenants I served with as a lieutenant in France, a guy who was actually my mentor to get used to being in France, to get acclimated to the regiment. And we ended up meeting in UNPROFOR, and he was a lieutenant colonel and I was a colonel, and big hugs and stuff. And the force commander saying, "Well, you guys know each other, Yeah, we were lieutenants together." So the military in general it's a small community that you make friends, and if you don't know the person personally, you know somebody that they know, and it's always a.
I think it's a really important point that it's one of the things that the military always talks about, interoperability, and I think it's not hard to do the intellectual exercise of knowing someone ahead of time, building the ark before the flood, so to speak, right? But when you actually have that opportunity to have trained with somebody and then you're on operations with them, or you see them, you've already built that rapport. It's really powerful.
Extremely powerful. And I dare say it's an issue of trust. You build the rapport, and let's just say it's going to be a positive relationship.
Yeah.
Sometimes maybe it doesn't. Maybe you say, "Oh, that guy's a jerk, and I never want to work with him again," or her. But most of the time, it's a very positive thing, and so the trust that you have there is that that you heard that this person here made the decision well. Okay, good. It must be a good decision, and here's why he or she did it, and so the trust is there. So taking that forward now to one of the things I've always thought about that I think is still extant and important to this day is how does national defense build trust with other government departments? And I've always thought that there's not enough exchange between national defense and the other departments, i.e., we should have more exchange officers in Ottawa or in different headquarters between other government departments and national defense. So we should send so that people get to know each other before the crisis and they understand the way. And I'm not just saying national defense sending military officers in those departments, but getting those departments to also reciprocate with officers, with exchange personnel. So anyway, long story to say that I really enjoyed my time in France. It was exciting. In those days, we were fighting. We were getting ready to fight the Soviets. The French were a conscript army. I had my troop living together in barracks, and I could go in there in the middle of the night with a whistle, and they would all be downstairs in 10 minutes and getting the vehicles ready, and we could be off to war. Like, very operational army. Even though, because of they were paying for their nuclear deterrent, individual clothing, and were not that was not at the top of the priorities. It was the nuclear deterrent was a big thing. And
one of the things you said about the importance of departments or agencies sort of understanding each other and working together. I mean, I think one of the interesting things about your career was the exposure you had to different jobs in Ottawa on the sort of first half of your career. How did that sort of being in those rooms in different jobs inform your thinking or influence your thinking about, I guess, the realities of Ottawa?
First of all, it was almost like I couldn't keep a job. So, I get to Ottawa. I command the regiment eventually in 89 to 91. I go to Cyprus for a third tour during that time. So working multinationally, I mean, I learned obviously as a lieutenant when I went there in 77, and then I went back in 83, and then in 1990. So working with other nations was very interesting. Obviously, 2 years in France too. I learned and of course being supported by our boys and girls in Germany. So multinational side of things is very interesting. But at NDHQ, when I got to NDHQ, I ended up I was a non-tech trained requirements guy for the Armored Corps. And so that was, first of all, learning, okay, what do you need to know about vehicles and so on to give good advice and to manage programs. Again, I was supported by guys who were fantastic, guys who were experts in their own, tech-trained majors and captains who did a great job and again made me look good. But then I was given a couple of specific responsibilities. For example, one of the things was the national procurement, all the things that we buy to support all the vehicles and for the Army at large. So that was a huge file that I dug into it. I always had the approach that I was not the smartest guy in the room. So I said, but one thing I can do is I can outwork everybody. And so it didn't matter to me if I would stay late, arrive early, stay late, and try to really. And I can say this for even at the regiment. I came in as operations officer. I replaced a guy who'd been there for 2 years who knew everything about operations inside out. And I thought, oh my God, I'll never be as good as this guy. I said, okay, well, stop worrying about that and get your nose to the grindstone and work your ass off. And so, I made up for my lack of smarts by maybe working it a bit harder, and it stood me in good stead. But so there, I'm DLR 3, Director of Land Requirements 3, and then this is during the 125th anniversary of Canada in 1992. So they said the commander of the Army, Kent Foster, happens to know a guy called Bill Pratt, who had been president of the Calgary Stampede and now was running this Canada 125 Corporation set up by the government at arm's length to do little projects for the 125th anniversary of the country. And so Bill Pratt and Kent are having lunch, and Pratt says, "I need a guy who's bilingual that can be my EA, and can you find me somebody?" So the long arm of the law comes down, and they offer me the job.
Yeah.
No, they said, okay, you go over there and do that. So I meet Bill and ended up spending 10 months with the guy who was fantastic, a real leader, and it was like having an MBA, doing an MBA. sitting beside him the whole time. And eventually, I was his EA at the beginning, but eventually I became chief of programs and ended up, managing $38 million out of the 50 they'd been given for the Canada 125 project. Loved it. But again, a different job. When I came back, instead of going back to DLR3, they said, we're going to put you in as assistant NDHQ secretariat. So worked for a guy called Bob Hamilton there, a Navy guy, outstanding guy, but had a chance then as a in the secretariat to go to a daily executive meeting every day. That's what they call the L1s now, I guess. The Chief of Defense Staff, Deputy Minister, and all the heads of the groups would meet every morning, and we had to write minutes that would go out, like by 10 o'clock, those minutes would be out for everybody to read.
So would that be the 3 stars and the ADMs?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so it's a big
meeting. Well, 20 some people and around the table, and you're taking notes. So you'd go there and so we had, I think, 3 or 4 other lieutenant colonels and myself, and we took turns taking notes, but very interesting to watch at the beginning it was John de Chastelin was the Chief of Defense Staff, and Bob Fowler was the Deputy Minister, and then eventually John Anderson became CDS, and then we had de Chastelin, the sequel,
right,
when he came 2.0, back. 2.0, yeah. Mm-hmm. And so very, very interesting, and I developed a great deal of respect for these guys and gals that were working at that level. Amazing people, and as a fly on the wall, you're listening to them and watching their interpersonal relationships and how they're jumping in and talking to each other and about things that are going on. Anyway, eventually I get promoted out of there to full colonel and end up going as chief of staff, chief of operations for UNPROFOR in the former Yugoslavia.
How was Yugoslavia different from Cyprus?
For Cyprus, of course, a very stable mission with very clearly defined belligerence, lines of confrontation. Nevertheless, our boys and girls doing patrolling in between, down a road where on the left you've got the Greeks and on the right you've got the Turks, and they're both armed to the teeth and looking through bunkers, and our little guys are carrying their radio and a soft cap, patrolling between the two. And whereas Yugoslavia was a whole different ball of wax, because of course I'd been in the daily executive meeting listening to the updates every day on what the mission was doing.
Yeah, of course.
Still not understanding, and I don't know if you agree, if you've been in this position before, but you're listening to this every day, but you still don't understand really what it's like on the ground until you deploy. And when I deployed, holy shit, that was different. That was really an eye opener, and because first of all, belligerents are all over the place. They're kind of certainly 3 main factions, and you've got partisans of all types, and no clearly defined lines of confrontation. Our troops, the rules of engagement are not that well developed, I would say. Also at this point, although after Somalia, there was a lot of work done to make sure that the rules of engagement were well known. And one of the things I always thought that was amazing, that I used to say that Americans sometimes went too deep into rules of engagement, and they wrote stuff like, you will not, torture. And I thought, why would we ever torture anybody? And then when Somalia happened, I said, well, maybe the Americans have got it right, that we need to remind people that they don't do that stuff. You just take for granted that Canadians would never do such a thing. But so, yeah, Yugoslavia, big eye opener. Being there for a year, though, I really enjoyed it, and I joined the headquarters in Zagreb when we were about to move into a new building. They'd just set up the headquarters and moved into a building. I went in there, and it was great because it was, again, starting a mission almost from scratch, putting the team together, deciding, where are we going to put the map, what room are we going to go into? No, that room's not good enough. And I got to, I guess, I got to exercise a lot of my own initiative to be able to put this together. And I loved it because when I arrived, the duty officer was in a small room with a telephone, not a map, nothing. And, he would get phone calls from New York saying, hey, what's happening on the ground? And, a Kenyan would have to get up and go and find out what the hell is going on. And, so I said, no, we have to be operational. And then ended up that we knocked a wall down and it put this great massive map on the wall. That's where we briefed the force commander every morning. I would brief him. It was so exciting to start, something from nothing. And eventually the mission grew to 35,000 people, so we had 6 subordinate headquarters. We had the 4 areas in Croatia. We had Bosnia and we had Macedonia. Those were our subordinate commands. And one of the things that I took as a responsibility as the chief of operations, I needed to know what was going on the ground. And so once a week, I would go to one of the subordinate headquarters and walk around and see the troops and see what they were doing and get a sense for the. So that allowed me then to come back, and when I was doing the briefing to the force commander in the morning, I could talk from experience, and I had been there and I'd spoken to the commanders and the operations guys, and so just loved it. Loved that. It was a pretty hot time too. I mean. This is during the Medak pocket, which has been topical now because, of course, it was September 1993. Right. And so I was delegated by the force commander to actually I wrote myself and a colleague of mine, this French guy that I'd met when I was in France, who was an executive assistant of the force commander. Him and I together wrote the agreement that the Croats were going to sign about the withdrawal on my computer. Printed it, and that's what they signed eventually. They eventually signed it, and then the force commander said, "Well, I want you to go down there and take command of the troops that are going to be down there." And so Jim Calvin and his battalion, was there, and then of course, what happened with the as the Croatians were withdrawing, they were doing a scorched earth policy and everything, and so Calvin did a great job. He's fantastic. His battalion was outstanding too. And I didn't know until just recently that Wayne Eyre was there.
Yeah, he was.
It's just there you go.
The people I've met that were in that fight in the Medak pocket. I mean, they're certainly they're proud of what they did, but they don't advertise it too much. I mean, it's not a well-known conflict, and I'll certainly link some background, some history in the show notes, so Canadians can give a bit of a read and learn some more about their own sort of military history, because it's not really spoken that much about, and it merits greater sort of knowledge and discussion.
Well, it sure does, and when you look at what came out of it, and eventually the International Crime Tribunal for Yugoslavia, I mean those guys like Graham Ademi, the British or the Brigadier General, the Croatian Brigadier General, who eventually was not found not guilty, was tried in Croatia, was. Is a guy I met, a guy that we negotiated with, and Carol Off wrote a great book called "The Ghosts of Medak Pocket." I don't know if you read it, but
I have not. But,
it's a very easy read, and she's great, and her and I talked a few times about it, and she's really anyway. It's a good book, and so I encourage everyone to read it.
How did your time in UNPROFOR inform your time in Kosovo?
Again, a whole different. Well, the first thing is, you in UNPROFOR met a bunch of Serbs, and got to know a little bit of the Serbian mindset and how they reacted to things. And of course, the whole issue of Kosovo was Serbian versus Albanian ethnic tensions and so on. So the other thing is, I talked about UNPROFOR being, kind of you think about UNPROFOR, we had Lou Mackenzie who opened Sarajevo a year before I got there. The mission had kind of morphed. First it was just Bosnia, and then it was just the United Nations protected areas, and then eventually they said, we're going to form this UNPROFOR is going to be look after all of those together in a preventive mission in Macedonia. So it was, when I got there, it was like starting again from a blank sheet of paper. Kosovo was truly a blank sheet of paper because, as you know, there'd been a lot of strife in Kosovo between Albanians, who were the majority in the province, some 2 million, and only something like 10% were Serbian, but at that time the Serbs were really running the country, the province, like a police state. You know, they were all the mayors of the towns, all the, you know, the heads of the school boards. You know, every administrator was run by the Serbs, and the Albanians were in a submissive state, if you wish. And Milosevic had reinforced Kosovo with a whole bunch of military and police forces to kind of keep it locked down. So before I got there, so this is in '98. All kinds of, you know, they set up this new Kosovo Liberation Army. So, terrorists, and, you know, one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter, right? So it depends how you look at the thing. But so the Albanians had these, the KLA. They had a guy called Rugova he was kind of the Gandhi of the place. He wanted to really do this very quietly, peacefully, but it hadn't been working. So the KLA came up. And so fighting between the KLA and the Serbs, and at one point the guy who did the Dayton Accords in Bosnia comes in, Ambassador Holbrooke, and meets with Milosevic, and he said, you know, we need to stop that. Negotiates with him and says, we're going to set up a verification mission called the Kosovo Verification Mission of 2,000 civilians who are going to verify that you are pulling out all the Serbs that you have reinforced the place with, all the forces. So that's how this comes to pass. And it's going to be an OSCE mission, not a UN mission. So I had never worked for the OSCE. I didn't know basically what it was, but OSCE at that time was an association of 55 countries, but not the Serbs had been thrown out. So 54 countries that did mostly election monitoring, small missions, humanitarian missions. And so for the first time, it was going to be a kind of a real verification, peacekeeping type mission, the largest mission they'd ever done. So they set up in Vienna, where the OSCE headquarters is, they set up the Kosovo Verification Mission Support Unit. That was going to be the place where that was going to prepare the mission, get it ready to deploy into Kosovo. And they asked this two-star British General Dravinkovic, they call him DZ, first letter or last letter, because it was easier to pronounce than Dravinkovic. And DZ is working in Vienna, and eventually was going to be the deputy head of mission for operations in Kosovo. And so he gives a call to Bill Leach, who was commander of the army at the time. I was a one-star working for Bill as the director general of land staff. And he said to Bill, you know, can you send me somebody to take my place in Vienna so that I can deploy? And he said, you should be there only for maybe 6 weeks or whatever. So Leach says to me, you want to go? I said, absolutely. So jump in a plane with my suitcase going to Vienna, right? So I've got, you know, nice clean clothes, and I'm going to be in Vienna.
Nice town.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, bring stuff to go to the opera, right?
Right.
I mean,
that's very much Vienna, yeah.
So I go to the headquarters. I'm there for about 3 weeks, and then the people are starting to talk about, you know, who's going to command the 5 different regional centers that are going to be of the mission, which will each fall into an organizations that they had already deployed, called the Kosovo Diplomatic Observer Missions. And so there are five different provinces, or not provinces, prefectures in Kosovo, in the province of Kosovo. So they were going to have one regional center in each one of those 5, and each was going to be commanded by somebody and they decided, it's not going to be the contact group nations. The contact group was, you know, Germany, France, UK, US, and Russia. They said it will not be one of those
Right.
guys, so other nations will command. So of course I'm in Vienna. I guess I'm easy to. So it turns out the OSC asks Canada if I can be deployed as the commander of the first regional center in Prizren, which is right on the border with Albania, and on the border with Albania. So obviously I thought this was a great opportunity, and I come back to Canada for a week, pick up my clean underwear, and then go back, and this time of course ready to deploy on the ground, end up arriving in Kosovo and taking command of this thing. So coming back to your question, very long answer. How did it inform me? Well, I knew what Serbians were like, I thought I'd at least, let's say that I had developed a certain knowledge of the culture and understanding a little bit of their background and the whole history of the region. But I did not know the specific history of Kosovo, which was something I found very interesting. So ended up doing, so I was supposed to be there until, for 6 months, the whole, and I'd already been in Vienna for 3 weeks. And I was there until the situation got so much out of hand in other sectors than mine, because I must say we were managing to keep a good lid on things in my regional center, that they were afraid that we were going to be taken hostage by the Serbs in those days, and there was the whole threat of an air campaign, and so the OSC decided to pull us out in March of '99, and so we were pulled out and reconstituted in Macedonia. And then they said, well, we're putting together a mission to go and look after the refugees that Milosevic has started pushing out. And again, very luckily, I was asked to go take the refugee task force together and go to Albania to look after the refugees. It's one of those things, Chris, that's so interesting. We always talk about, giving clear direction, clear orders, and then the military, we really... So how's this for a mission? I want you to take 75 people, 15 vehicles, go to Albania and see if you can help. That's my mission. So the beauty of that is you kind of write your own ticket, right? You write your own mission, and how can we... And so the approach I always took was, how do I add value and not be an obstacle? So I get my 75 folks together, and the Brits, and a multinational group. The Russians had decided to pull out, so they're going back to Russia. So I had people from lots of nations. Great group. The first thing you do, of course, you learn that when you're a lieutenant. First thing you do is you're going to be my 2IC, right?
Yeah.
And so we took 75 vehicles. We deployed to Albania. We ended up having people at each of the 12 or 13 prefectures in Albania, because the Albanians took a different approach than the Macedonians. Macedonians, as the refugees were coming across, they would put them together in camps along the border, whereas the Albanians would bring people all the way through Albania and deploy them and put the refugees in each of the prefectures, kind of among families, host families, which is interesting because Albania in those days, 2 million people, the most the poorest country in Europe. They had basically nothing, but they were willing to share it with the refugees coming across. By the time I left, there were 400,000 refugees across Albania. When you think of a population of 2 million hosting 400,000 refugees, it's pretty incredible.
What was it like being in the center of a humanitarian crisis of that size?
It was heart-ripping. It was really heart-ripping, and of course, you work. You don't count your hours there. It's not an 8 to 4 job, as you know, and you're. It really grates on you. Really gets you down. Really, and I remember many times. I mean, being all by myself in my office and bawling like a baby, and having also incidents or anecdotes where you just can't believe the people's reaction and the people's inhumanity to people. And I think one of the notes I was making earlier is that what you learn, or what I certainly brought back from that, is the people are always the ones that take the brunt of all this. War yeah, we military, we're trained to do this. We're, trained to fight, to advance, to withdraw, to picket, or whatever. But the normal people, as soon as something happens, and these people, especially in Kosovo, as soon as something would happen, they would pick up, whatever they could carry, and they would just move on to the next village until things quieted down, and then come back. And you'd see them, as soon as the shelling stopped, okay, they're outside with a broom, and they're cleaning the place up, and incredible, ability to come back from these things. But the people are always the ones that ceux qui écopent, they're the ones that really take it on the chin. And so it was quite tough. One of the anecdotes I think I might have told you about earlier, but was so I'm in my headquarters in Albania, and the people were coming across the border with Kosovo. The refugees, and the Serbs were pushing them across with, they take away all their papers. If they were in a car, they take away the license plate, and they would just push them across. So you imagine these people are refugees. They have there's no record of them. Your driver's license has been taken away. Who knows your name is Chris? What? Who the hell knows? Mm-hmm. You think about that. And of course, a lot of them had been mistreated. So they would come across, and we would also, the other task we were doing at the time is we were taking interviews. We were interviewing them on how they had been treated by the Serbs, by the people. And, a lot of them said, well, they took all the men away and they left us, and, the women would say, and we haven't seen, my uncle, I haven't seen my dad, or I haven't seen my husband. And, we'd make notes, and all those interviews would go to The Hague.
Right, to the War Crimes Tribunal.
Yeah, and Louise Arbour was our prosecutor there, and I think that's what eventually allowed her, or made her able to indict Milosevic, and eventually ended up going to testify against him, and on 2 other occasions to other perpetrators of bad things. Anyway, one of the good things was the 15 vehicles that I took with me. We were in orange vehicles in Kosovo while we were there, and after we were evacuated, I took those same vehicles and went to Albania. So the refugees that were coming across had seen us patrol for months in their areas, and it was these patrols were really personal things, and we would stop, talk to the people, and we had interpreters with us all the time. And so when they were coming across as refugees, they would see our vehicles, and it'd say, oh, the KVM is here, and it's almost like seeing an old friend and giving them a little bit of positive reinforcement, and that things were going to be okay. And and for the longest time I knew the phrase "I'm from Prizren," in Albanian. Right. And so the refugees would meet them, and they'd say, they'd talk to you in Albanian. I couldn't understand, but I would say, "I'm from Prizren" in Albanian, and they it was very very cool. Anyway, but so it was a tough mission. So I was going to say this one incident. I'm in my office, and these 2 young guys who had been our local employees in Prizren come to my office, and young guys, probably in their 20s, early 20s, and I knew one of them just had a child, and they had just been pushed across by the Serbs, and they came to see me, and they said, "Sir," and they could speak English, and they said, we're going to join the Kosovo Liberation Army. We're going to train, and we're going to go back and fight for our country. Well, ripped my heart out, and give these kids a big hug, and started crying. It was and again, you think about Canadians, and coming back to an hour ago what I said about being so lucky to live in Canada, and unless you see this kind of desire to fight for your country and to be ready to put your life on the line, we talk about it, of course, in the military, unlimited liability and everything, but these guys, they were living it right there. Pretty incredible.
Yeah, it is one of those things I think you have to see to understand. You have to really be in those environments for it to resonate on the level that you just described. It's tough to make it an intellectual exercise of saying, oh, I can kind of understand that, unless you actually go through it. Now, after Kosovo, I think you had another really interesting sort of operational experience that I wasn't aware about before we spoke, and you were in Tampa with Central Command, which was controlling U.S. operations in the Middle East right after 9/11. How did you end up down in the center of all that?
Well, so I'm assistant DCDS. So the deputy chief of defense staff was a guy called Greg Madison, which many folks know, a naval vice admiral, great guy, and I'm the assistant to him as a 2-star. And when 9/11 happened, I happened to be actually on running a promotion board in Gatineau, and we see this happening on the news, and so of course drop everything and come back to the headquarters, and we're in the middle of the whole, the airplanes are coming down, we're landing them all, and I'm as in DCDS was the operations guy at the time, right? And so Greg is there, I'm there, and the joint staff are all around us, and we're in contact with NORAD, and keeping the Prime Minister informed and everything. It's a real crisis, and in fact, my wife Barbara was in the financial control center, and so she was involved in it as well, and so very exciting stuff. So as time goes on, of course, we're now reopening the sky, but there are a couple of incidents that happen, airplanes, that are not squawking the right thing, and one of them lands. I don't know if you remember this one. They landed in I think in Yellowknife, and there's a lonely RCMP guy who goes to see the airplane, and he's the only guy there, right? And turned out that they just malfunctioned the thing. But anyway, very cool times. But and then. At the beginning of October, so 9/11, right, September 11th, and then the beginning of October, General Hainaut, who was the chief of defense staff at the time, said, I need to send somebody to Tampa, to the headquarters of Central Command, commanded by a guy called Tommy Franks at the time, 4-star U.S. general. And I need to send somebody to offer packages to the U.S. for the coalition of the willing in the fight against terrorism. So he says this to Greg Madison. Greg says, I can send Maisonneuve, and of course, very happy to go. And so he sends me and a guy from the Air Force and a guy from the and a 1-star from the Air Force and a 1-star from the Navy. So the three of us go down there, and we arrive on the 3rd of October. And are met by the 2IC, the second in command to Tommy Franks, a guy called Rifle DeLong, General DeLong, a Marine guy, big gruff guy, picks me up, and we end up going down in a Challenger, and we land right there at MacDill, right, Air Force Base. Anyway, and so I go to meet Tommy Franks. We hit it off. A great guy, cigar smoker. So we end up smoking a cigar together. Very, very cool guy. And so for the time we're there, we're negotiating. Well, not negotiating. We're saying, okay, what can we offer? What would the U.S. like? And I'm corresponding back to Canada and on the DCDS side and saying, okay, what kind of packages? So one of the first things we did was we rerouted a ship that had been with the Stanhope Foreland, the Navy, the standing naval group, and so on. So we're looking at, okay, can we send a battalion group? What can we send? And we're discussing packages that Canada could provide to the war, and so we're working flat out during the whole day, kind of thing, and then eventually on the 7th of October. 7th of October was a Sunday. So the 6th of October, we go into Tommy Franks would have a normal meeting, 9:00 meeting of his staff. And so he'd been in a U-shaped table, and Tommy's in the middle. And on the right side is a sign that says Canada. The left side is a sign that says UK. And then beside it is, Australia. And then all the 2-star U.S. generals and admirals who are on the joint staff, the heads of the different heads. So I mean, Canada's right there. We're an important part, and I'm sitting beside Tommy Franks, and every morning at 9:00, and then on the 6th of October, which is a Saturday, the I'm sitting there. We're waiting for Frank's. He comes in and he's wearing flip-flops and shorts and a Hawaiian shirt. He says, we've been working flat out for, 3 weeks now. He said, planning this thing, and I've been telling these guys they should relax a little bit. So today was, So anyway, we go ahead and do the normal morning brief. And the next day is the Sunday, and there isn't supposed to be no meeting at 9 o'clock. So I say to my 2 1-stars, I say, okay, tomorrow, it's Sunday. I said, let's come in civvies. And, I'd like to go to church and then we can maybe do a bit of sightseeing, but we'll work, but, come in civvies. So, yeah, good idea. So the next day I come in there at 8 o'clock, and then I'm wearing a Hawaiian shirt and chinos, and a young corporal pops his head in the office, says, actually, General Franks wants to have a meeting at 9 o'clock. Okay. So, you know where this is going.
Yeah, well.
So I walk in, and of course they're all assembled except for Franks, and they're all in full combat uniforms. And I'm in my Hawaiian shirt, so I sit down at my place, a little bit sheepish. And I noticed that by VTC on the screen in front of us is Donald Rumsfeld and all the commanders deployed in the mission area. So, and then walks in Tommy Franks, fully dressed, of course, in his combats, and he sits beside us, and he sits beside me at the head of the table and says, at noon today, the first Tomahawk land attack missiles are going to land on Kabul. Holy crap! This is the start of the war. And so Rumsfeld says, by VTC says, I'm sorry, President Bush wanted to be here, but he was pulled away at the last minute. But he asked me to pass on, your best, best of luck and everything. And Tommy Franks proceeds to go to all the commanders on the ground. Is everything okay? Are we ready to go? Everything's fine. Yep. Everything's good to go. A1. And so meeting ends. I run back to my office, and we had the Stu 3 telephones. I don't know. Do they still have them? Those secure telephones?
Whatever the current version of it is, but they were in use up to not too long ago. Yeah.
Anyway, there's telephones with a secure key, and you had to, Anyway, so I call General Hainaut on the Stu 3. We just got the word that at noon today, hostilities will begin, and so he said, great, I'm going to call the Prime Minister. So General Hainaut apparently called the Prime Minister, and I heard later, and in fact, General Hainaut himself told me that he spoke to Mr. Chrétien, and Chrétien said to him, well, that's probably why George Bush wants to talk to me at 11 o'clock. So Canada, because of our presence there, and, the Canadian forces were well ensconced in the U.S. Mission, managed to get a lot of credit, and the Canadian forces got the credit of advising the government before the actual operation. So that was again, a very historical moment. I mean, you're sitting there and you know that, it's going to be the start of a huge operation, a huge campaign. And so anyway, I think a day later, 2 days later, we repatriated back. I left one of the guys there, or maybe he went back later, but we came back to Canada, and things went on, and it was a pretty high time in those days. Yeah.
Now, I'd like to maybe talk a little bit about what you did after you retired from the forces, because your service of in uniform is pretty well known. But I think you have a really interesting job when you retired. Can you talk about that a little bit? Yeah.
Of course, I went to NATO, spent 4 years there. Again, talking about starting things from a blank sheet of paper, we stood up the NATO headquarters in Norfolk that didn't exist before. It was a naval headquarters, and we changed it into a transformational headquarters. And so that was pretty exciting, too. But then the issue was, okay, I was turning 53. I thought, okay, maybe I'll have a chance to be Chief of Defense Staff. If that doesn't work out, I think I'll pull the plug and, be done. It turns out that Rick Hillier got chosen for Chief of Defense Staff. Fantastic guy, just the guy we needed at the right time. And he asked me to come back as his Deputy Chief of Defense Staff. I said, actually, Rick, no, I'm going to going to stay here for one more year, and then I'll retire. So that'll give you a chance to kind of solidify your plot of who's going to replace me and the whole senior officers plot. So that's what I did. Came back to Canada and moved to Hamilton because my wife is from Hamilton originally. I thought that would be a good move. She didn't think it was that great a move, but anyway. One morning, I was in contact with Rick, and and one morning I went to Ottawa. I think I was there for something else, but I ended up that we were having breakfast together, and he said to me, "Listen," he said, "we're reopening Saint-Jean," and Gord O'Connor was our Minister of Defense. I'd known Gord O'Connor. I was a lieutenant colonel. He was a brigadier general, and we had, I'd worked for him at that time, so I knew him well. And Rick said, "We're reopening Saint-Jean. The government has announced that it's reopening, so I need somebody to go as either the chair of the Board of Governors or the principal academic director." And I said, "Well," I said, "Rick, I'm not an academic. I have a master's degree, but I don't have I don't have a doctorate, and I've never worked in it." He said, "Well, I know that, but," he said, I need you more for the organizational abilities," and he said to get this thing started at least. So I said, "Okay." So I ended up going there, arriving in December 2007, and meeting, a bunch of the folks that already had been there, the professors and so on, and so again, another place where you kind of start from ground zero, from scratch, and just stand it up, and so create a team and build on what they've already accomplished, and so I really, really enjoyed that. Jumped on that with 2 feet. My friend John Cowan was the principal at RMC, so him and I were working closely together, and I was, using a lot of his knowledge and experience, and he helped me greatly. And I also had some fantastic professors who were in Saint-Jean that I was able to lean on for the academic side of things. But on the organizational side of things, I was able to, do a few things that would help the college and stand up. And a great commandant was there at the time. The first commandant was François Pillon, an airy guy, a full colonel, really good. And eventually, I ended up, with Guy Maillet and Jenny Carignan and all the other commandants that came after, Simon Bernard. I better name them all or they'll be pissed off.
Yeah, it's always a challenge, right?
Gervais Carpentier was the last guy.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, Carp was there.
Yeah, Carp was fantastic. And in fact, I just had a note from Carp, so a great guy. And all this to say is it was a really great experience. And obviously, I knew my place, but on the other hand, I was able to maybe mentor the commandants a little bit as well, and which was a lot of fun. And to this day, I have a great relationship with all of them. They were all great young officers, up and coming, and so really loved it. And the college, we managed to get it back to university level, and by the time I left in 2018, we had the charter was back on, and we were about to graduate the first class of graduates from the college. So it's continuing. It's a small college, but really doing well as we speak. So,
I've wondered this. From my time in working at Royal Military Colleges, how is the relationship with the city? The town of Saint-Jean, because la coopération, I think, is a really interesting construct, and it seems like it's a really good relationship between the unit and the town.
It's a fantastic relationship, and this was a very smart thing that the National Defense did. Sometimes they get it right. When they closed the college in '93, they decided to set up this corporation that was going to look after They handed the site over to the city. The city created this corporation that was going to run the site.
Because it's a historic site.
It's a historic site. Yeah, it's the second oldest fully military occupied site other than Quebec City in North America. So, pretty impressive, and so it was important to. So they were using it while the college was closed as a meeting space, training space, like the Sûreté du Québec would use it sometimes to do classes, and they'd use the parade square to do their anti-émeute,
the
riot squad training and so on. So this corporation, when National Defense said we'd like to come back, they said fine, and the corporation then ended up getting a contract to provide all logistics support for the college while it's on there. So instead of having CE guys, construction engineering and kind of the public service running the kitchens and all that stuff, it's all done through the corporation. And the corporation they've got a board, board of directors and a CEO. And so, and it's a non-profit organization. And any profit they make, they have to turn back into the national defense. So it's fantastic because the buildings are kept up to date perfectly. There's never, and I'm sure you as D cadets there must have had some fun in Kingston with these things sometimes. But the cadets, like the food is outstanding because it's all contract. It's run by the corporation, and even the gym now is completely run by the corporation. So the services are first class, and I've always thought this is a great model that could work at RMC as well. Because what's interesting is when they created the corporation, a lot of the folks that were working in the logistics side of the college ended up getting out, retiring from the military and staying on as members of the corporation, employees. Yeah. So they know the military, they know the place, and if you get a good CEO like they've had now, he's able to make a real great team to control this thing. So the reason I took the job though was because we always thought, Barbara and I discussed this, and I always thought that I had probably enough juice in the tank to do one more big job, full time. At 53, and so that's what I ended up doing, and ended up doing it for 10 and a half years. Loved it. The academic world is so different, you don't get a phone call at 3 a.m. saying your professors, I lost my slide rule, I don't know if they're still use them, but there's never an emergency, I mean, it's very controlled and, structured, and it's research and it's academics, and it's a real leadership challenge because academics are a little bit like NGOs. They never want to be synchronized. They never want to be, they don't like to work as teams. They like to arrive in their office and do research and, be left independent and all that. But if you use your leadership properly, you can actually bring these guys together, and guys and gals, and make a real team out of them, which we had a great time doing.
Well, there's certainly a thread that runs throughout your professional career, whether it be talking about going from Quebec to Saskatchewan and Thunder Bay, and having the understanding between how, say, francophone or anglophone soldiers think or communicate, and then these different missions you've had that, and it clearly sort of served you well all the way through the ability to navigate those situations.
A lot of it's by luck, though. It's just you get put in these positions, and you either sink or swim. And again, I come back to sometimes I've always thought I don't know what's going on, but I'm going to work my ass off to get to know it. And you try to work harder than everybody else, and
Yeah, I think that is probably more than the luck. It's the hard work. I mean, there's no doubt you can end up in a job, I think, that is you're maybe more suited to your aptitudes, which then you generally like more. But there's just so much that you can overcome with hard work and perseverance. Yeah. There's no doubt.
One of the things I was sure at the regiment, for example, as a senior captain, I thought I would come back as the adjutant of the regiment. I thought I would be great at paperwork and all that stuff. Ended up being the operations officer. And I loved it, and then I used it as, I would always find an operational reason to stick my nose into everything, Said, operations officer has to know about that. And when I became a squadron commander, I knew a little bit less than the operations officer, So you never know how things are going to go. But I was very lucky. I had some fantastic people who worked for me, who made me look good. I had outstanding mentors who looked after me and gave me advice and told me when I was going awry, and got balled out. I got balled out by warrant officers when I was as a young captain. And I remember a really great warrant officer called Red Hayes. I was in Gagetown as an instructor, and I was a troop leader, in Gagetown. And one day he came in, and his name was Red Hayes because he had a red hair, and he had a temper to match it, and he closed the door, and he frickin' came aboard me, and his voice got 2 octaves higher when he was screaming, and so I said, Warrant, you're absolutely right, but fantastic, the ability of these guys to make me see where I've gone wrong and, not go 2 ways about it, Anyway.
So you finished off in your public service career, and now between your remarks at the Vimy Gala, a number of op-eds, I mean, you're now in the public spotlight. And what do you hope to achieve, or why have you sort of stepped into the ring on in this way? Because certainly, I mean, after how many years of uniformed and public service did you have?
45.
Yeah, so after 45 years, I mean, there's ample reason to not. I'm just curious as to why you decided to.
Well, I think I must say I think the last 10 years of my 45 in the public service, what I saw happening inside the Canadian Forces, and then to the country in general, really disappointed me. It disappointed me, and it made me angry. Frankly, it made me realize that some of the things that were going on, I did not agree with, and I was just very disappointed in where our country was headed. Extremism on the left or on the right is wrong, and so what I saw made me angry, and so I guess it built to the point where I was extremely honored to receive the Vimy Award, to be nominated and by General Hinault, by the way, and then to be chosen. It's an honor that I never expected in my life to receive, but I also saw it as an opportunity, and so the speech, the Vimy speech, as soon as I heard that I was nominated and that I was chosen. You have to remember there's 2. I was the 2020 nominee, and the Vimy the presentation was only in 2022, in the fall of 2022, okay. Right? So there were 2 years because of COVID. So I was stewing with those 2 years. What am I going to do? What am I going to say? What kind of a speech am I going to make? This is my opportunity to say how I feel, and how will I do this? Will I do it as let's say, as a partisan or as a Canadian? And I think at this point, I had decided I was going to speak as a Canadian. And what I wanted to do was to just begin a debate. I did not want to call anybody names, or I didn't want to attack anyone personally. But I wanted to speak as a Canadian, really give my sense of where we are as a country. And so, I drafted that speech very carefully over many months, making notes, and then the final kind of 2 weeks really put it together. And Barbara was incredible in helping me, and she's very very good at writing and so forth. So it was a real hard work, but I felt that this was an opportunity to make some points and to create some debate in Ottawa, which I've always thought is a little bit insular, where, and I'm sure you ran into this being in the military in your career, where they would say, I'm one of these officers, I'm very lucky I was never posted to National Defense Headquarters. I spent all my time outside of Ottawa. Well, you know what I felt when I got posted to Ottawa as a lieutenant colonel? I thought, okay, these guys have got it all wrong. Ottawa is where the decisions are made. Ottawa is where the money is spent, is where the money it is, and where the political decisions are made. So it's an insular place. And when you're out in, whether you're in Chicoutimi or whether you're in Bagotville or where you're in Cold Lake or anywhere else, you don't understand what it's like to be in Ottawa and, where the decisions are made. So if I was going to make a point, if I was going to start a debate, Ottawa was the place to do it. And so in this insular space, and of course, it started a debate, all right. I mean, and the interesting thing is, no one has ever written me directly to tell me, I disagree with your remarks. Here's why. Here's some points that I want you to understand. It's never been, the debate never happened, but he created a lot of furor. But I still think I had a little bit of positive things to say, and I said, Canada, we can be a lot better than we are. I don't want to say Canada can be great again, because it's not a very well used phrase in Canada. It's not very much understood, but Canada was a fantastic place, and our country still has an incredible potential. So I finished by singing, it's a wonderful world, nevertheless, and nobody talks about that. I guess my voice was not that good. But seriously, so the point, I wanted to make the point. I think I made the points that I think are important, and now we need to continue to have this debate. We need to get the debate, put the issues on the table.
Okay, Michel, the last question I ask all the guests is if you have any recommendations for the listeners that will educate, entertain, or elevate. So what have you got for us?
Well, I've got two things. First, one is a book, and another is I guess a little bit of advice, self-advice. The book is called The 1867 Project. It's a book on Canada. It's a book of 20 different authors that talk about our country. It's edited by Mark Milke. Easy to find, and it really it sets straight a lot of the things that we've heard in the news recently and in our past, and the things that we've apologized for, which apologizing is okay, but you need to go beyond that and put it in the right context. So that's the book I would recommend. The other thing is, I believe very strongly in three components of health: physical health, mental health, and spiritual health. We didn't talk about spiritual health, and people normally don't talk about it, whether you want to call it religious or contemplative. I really think that leaders everywhere, civilian, military, need to think about those three things, and they will manifest themselves in different ways. The physical is obviously very easy, and different people do different things, play hockey or work out or whatever. Mental health, keeping a great balance in terms of, doing some things that are different than the physical ones, thinking about other than work. And then spiritual health, I think, is to go beyond that and elevate, talking about elevation, thinking of the higher purpose, thinking of, do you believe? And if you do you practice? And so something that I've tried in my whole life to kind of keep those three things in mind, and I think that is something that has kept me grounded as much as I can be grounded, but I think it's very important for people to think about.
Thanks again to you and Barbara for having me into your beautiful home here in Y Country, and really appreciate you being a guest on the Northern Sentinels podcast. Thanks, Michel.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You can find information in the show notes on Canada 125, UNPRA 4 and the Medak Pocket, U.S. Central Command and General Tommy Franks, Michel's recent public remarks and op-eds, and the 1867 Project. Thanks for listening to the NSP. Goodbye until next time.